Welcome to Her Enterprise with me, Melissa.
Hey, and me, Kelly.
And it's me, Nicole.
Join this group of
entrepreneurial women building community and masterminding through our problems.
So we can all
lean into your values,
cut what doesn't serve you,
and grow in abundance. Let's get to it, change makers. All right. Well, hello, everybody. This is Kelly with Her Enterprise, and I'm here with Nicole. Hi, Nicole.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me today. Hey, good to be here.
And Melissa.
Hi, everyone. How are you doing today?
I'm so excited to be here today, and we're talking about pivoting, and some of us are being forced to pivot. Some of us are choosing to pivot because of everything that's happening or just the season we're in life right now. And today we're just going to discuss what signs led us to pivot and how that turned out, and along with some other lessons that we've learned in pivoting in our own personal or professional lives. And we're excited to share them with you, and hopefully this will help you as you continue to balance and find your place in this next season of life. So let's go. Awesome. I know Nicole was really excited to share a lot of what she's going through with this.
Right. I was excited because I'm in a pivot right now. I chose the year 2019-2020 to be my mini retirement year, where I stepped away from teaching after teaching for 12 years at the middle school and high school level Spanish. I chose to pivot and take a mini retirement. The original plan was to move to Puerto Rico, and after about 4 months on the road, and last summer, if you know anything about Puerto Rico, it sort of fell apart. We have some family there, and they begged us not to come. As it turned out, there were earthquakes this year and a whole other slew of things that affected the country in ways, or the territory in ways that were difficult. So we ended up settling in San Antonio, and that right there was a huge pivot for me, because I was planning on working with clients online, living on the island, teaching my children Spanish fluently, having them be around some family. The cost of living is lower, a little bit lower in San Juan, and we're actually going to be in a city called Mayaguez than the cost of living is in San Antonio, although San Antonio is cheaper than cost of living was right out of DC, where we moved from. So I feel like I'm in a season of pivoting, and I've had to pivot within the pivot because of the COVID pandemic. So I guess if you know you can work with a coach, one of my big tips for pivoting was, if you're not sure if you should pivot, maybe get the help of a coach. And I had a coach named Jillian Johnsrud, and she's actually part of the reason why we all met for Her Enterprise. And she really helped me work through this mini retirement year. Can I take a year and figure out what I could do with my business as opposed to just being in the classroom? I was burnt out. I had 3 children of my own, and I knew that I needed to do something different. So that's my big sort of my piece of advice is, if you can find someone who's done it, you can find a coach or a mentor who can sort of help you through the steps, especially with me, because I made a big jump and I'm still working through it. But that's one of my big takeaways for pivoting is, if you can find a coach or a mentor, if you know it's a big jump, then go ahead and get some other eyes in there and get some advice.
This might be too personal, so it's okay if
Nothing's too personal. Nothing's too personal for me.
Do you feel any disappointment around like that sounds like a huge change from being on an island and imagine how you'd imagine a mini retirement to like how it's happened now. Like, do you have disappointment around that? And how do you feel about, I mean, I imagine it's an ongoing process, like working through that, but how do you feel about where you're at and how your pivoting's turning out? And then do you see that shifting directions you perceive going in the future, or?
So I had to work through a lot of grief about Puerto Rico. I went there in college. My husband's from there. So we had a lot of hope. We had just gone there in January of 2019 to kind of figure out where we would live. We were looking at houses, and of course, we were going to rent something. We ended up having to buy a house here because we didn't even have the right kind of income to really buy a house. So that was a whole fiasco just trying to get a place to live here in San Antonio. So there was a lot of grief. I was sad probably for like a whole month, but also I have three children that needed to get in school and and we needed a place to live. I was so busy that I worked through it on my own kind of when there were moments where I could feel bad or sad about it. I'm really lucky that San Antonio is a Spanish speaking city. I mean, this is Mexican American culture. Tejas. This is Tejano culture, alive and well. Everything is bilingual. So the language piece really made it easier to stay here because I didn't feel like I was giving up all of the Spanish I was hoping to give to my children. There is some of that culture here. There is a vibrant culture that I was happy to come and settle here and feel like we can find friends and we can be at events. I can still go salsa dancing, and you can go salsa dancing anywhere, but it's still there. The culture is strong here, the Tejano culture, and we like it. So we've been able to make that adjustment. It made it a little less sad, but it's not Puerto Rico, but there's a beach 2 hours away. There's bunches of lakes and Texas tubing and rope swinging into the water, and it's cool. It's definitely a total different culture, which is what I wanted for the kids. So they are getting that. They are getting a total different culture, different perspective, new place, and there is Spanish language here. So those were pieces. Those were part of the reason why my husband and I said when Puerto Rico wasn't turning out the way we thought it would, we said, could we settle here? And that's when we started deciding. We decided in August last year to stay here permanently, and then we finally bought a home in November.
It's great that you were able to find some of those aspects that would kind of have the community that you were kind of searching for, have the culture, like you said.
Yeah,
I'm
that
happy to
piece.
hear that.
Thanks, Melissa. Yeah, it did help ease it a little bit. It helped ease the transition a little. And what about you, Melissa? Do you have any pivoting stories to tell us?
Yeah. So I think a big pivot for me was the fact that when I had my kid and I was in school, I planned that my next kid, I'm going to take a whole year off. Like, that's what I want to do. But I'm also in like the personal finance community. So, anybody who's heard about the one more year syndrome, like, I just kept working because I was like, oh, I don't feel super financially secure yet. So, I'm going to work a little bit longer and I'm going to work a little bit longer. But at a point, I actually got laid off from my job in aerospace. And even though I had planned to take that time off, to take a year off before my daughter was going into elementary school, because I wanted to have like that focused parenting time, which is a big pivot in itself, going from like going to work and then wanting to do the focused stay-at-home mom. That's a big pivot in your schedule. And even though it was planned, because the layoff was a surprise, I had to take time to process what just happened. Like, I'm not financially worried because of the layoff, but I am now. I really need to think about, like, what is my day gonna look like? What am I gonna do with my time? And I think that can be a really challenging thing when you do pivot, is just the fact that your schedule changes can be very dysregulating. I mean, and I've had the experience, not just that layoff, but once my daughter was old enough to go into elementary school, and now suddenly I had the whole day to myself. Like, that's a giant shift, a giant pivot in what your schedule looks like again, and what's your purpose. Like, my purpose while I was at home was like engaging and being with my daughter, and then now she's at school. So what's my purpose now? What am I going to do? So that's those have been like the biggest lessons I've learned from pivoting, is like, even if you plan it, if something happens for it to happen before you get to your day that you were planning to leave, like, you're going to be surprised. And then just having to work through what your day looks like, even if you made a list of like, oh, these are all the things I'm going to do when I have the whole day to myself, like it still takes time to adjust for a big pivot in your schedule. How
Yeah.
about you, Kelly?
Well, I was just gonna go off of what you said for the layoff because so with COVID, my husband, it's interesting to see how we each process the layoff, right? So I have my own business and but it was forced to close for a few months, like a significant aspect of it. And then my husband was furloughed for 4 months and he's just going back next month, which is great. But it's interesting to see our process because right away when we were furloughed, I'm like, we're retiring. What do you want to do? It's a sabbatical. And then he's like, that is not the way to look at it. And I'm like, what other businesses do we want to start? Like, my mind is immediately like, ooh, what else can we do? And then he's like, no, it's the end of the world. And he spent like a good 3 months of his sabbatical like trying to find other jobs and working, and I did this like map. I'm like, we have all the money that we need to make it through this. Like, we have the personal capital, we have the like, I was like, we don't have the emotional capital to risk you getting just some job for no reason because I like had a baby in this time, and I was like, I don't want to risk COVID like in our house with a baby. So it was just really interesting to see all of our things. And I feel like just the last couple weeks, so it took him like a month to get creative again. And then it took him like just the last couple weeks, he was like, all right, it's fine. I've adjusted. We're on vacation or whatever. Like, what do we do with this time? And I was like, it would have been nice if you were here 3 months ago, but it's amazing to see our process and where that goes. Okay, so that was the point of that long thing. So I always see pivoting as a way to solve a problem, and whether it's like a problem within our own lives or just a problem that we see in our community. And one of the biggest pivots that I've seen professionally in my business was when I added services. So I was a doula for 10 years, and then I think like, well, 2009. Yeah, so 11 years. And then I added doing cranial sacral and then shifted into doing cranial sacral therapy for our clients. And it was because there was no one in the area that did it, and it was a huge need for babies and breastfeeding and whatever. And I was tired of being on call. It was super demanding having that schedule. So a schedule was like what propelled me to pivot. And then it ended up being that I made way more doing cranial sacral therapy. I was filled a significant need. Like, people drive hours to come for cranial sacral therapy. So it was a really great shift, I think, for our schedule, because then it went from being on call 2 weeks at a time or a month at a time, and just being like, and if you're on call as a doula, you're either gone, like you could be gone for like 4 hours or you could be gone for like 3 days, depending on how you have things set up. And that just wasn't sustainable for our family. So shifting to cranial sacral therapy was a great way for me to just schedule little 4-hour blocks multiple times a week to meet clients. And that was, I think, huge. But it was, yeah. So I don't know. I love the pivots.
When did you know that you wanted to make the change? Like, what was it? Was there any like certain thing that happened in your life, or was it over time just building up with the scheduling and
So I think part of it was I saw a lot of clients. I had a string of back labors in clients. And I don't know if either of you have had a back labor or
I
just
know
a
it's
long
bad.
labor. They're like, they're awful. And people who work through them are champions because it's just like when a baby is malpositioned, and it can just be a really painful long labor. And I was like, I have to figure this out. So if a baby's positioned well and your body's in balance, which helps baby position well, then labor's a lot quicker. And I had a lot of clients that weren't comfortable going to a chiropractor or getting that form of body work. So then I had asked someone in the area, I was like, hey, is there a gentle way to do this that I can offer my clients who aren't comfortable with chiropractic work? And someone had recommended cranial sacral, which I knew about from when I had a brain injury, which is its own story. But yeah, so that was kind of like the first part. And I don't think I really knew what I was getting into at the time. And they kind of slowly both, like, it wasn't like a clean cut thing. I just built one while doing the other. And then one kind of took on the life of its own. So yeah. And then the less I wanted to do births. Like, I love doing births, and every birth worker will know it's hard to say goodbye to doing births, but you're like, I'm just going to say see you later. We'll see you later. But it takes so much emotional load for like a family to support and different things like that. So I ended up I had a lot of fun like building a market, and I do like going into like blue seas. So sometimes I'll get really bored, or how do I know this until it's end? So I think it was also just intellectually interesting to me too, where I was like, how do I master this? I don't
Right.
know
It's
if that
I agree. The learning piece of pivoting is always exciting. It keeps you, because you're usually pivoting into something that's a little different than what you did before. Um, so I agree that that's exciting because you're like reinvigorated with the learning process of what it's going to be to do this thing now. And it might not be, like I made a smaller pivot where I was doing Spanish tutoring, and now I'm doing more like ADHD coaching, and I'm writing a book on ADHD family life and tools. And that pivot was smaller because I knew I was still doing my own business, but it fulfilled me so much more. And it was so easy to do Spanish tutoring. I've done teaching for years, but the writing the book part, I'd only been blogging for a few years, so that was different. It's been, the editing process too has been really new, working with an editor and stuff. So I agree that when you pivot to something new, it's like it opens up excitement and change, which can be good, even if it's uncomfortable sometimes.
yeah. Yeah, and I do think it was great. Um my network was huge. Like having an expertise within like the childbearing year, and then already knowing all of the midwives and all of the birth workers, and that was like a huge help in me transitioning into focusing on like pregnancy and childbirth and the newborn within cranial sacral therapy, that it wasn't hard to get referrals in that new space. Like I was able to use all of those skills to like work there. So, what are some ways you guys adjust or maintain agility if you've been like forced to pivot and you need to like kind of cope to keep your head in the game? Do you have any thoughts on that? I know I'll kind of always muse that most of life is a mind game, and that we just got to keep our head in the game, and all of life, like labor, is a mind game. And so sometimes when we're being forced to pivot, whether it's a layoff or something, having tools to help us address that can be huge. So you mentioned coaching and having a coach. Like, what are there other resources that have been helpful to maintain agility, or free, or have you noticed in times that you've frozen before and how that impacted things, or just paused?
I mean, I need our mastermind group and us, the fact that we get together and talk about business and our life, and that we're working on this project together, and having other business women to talk to about shifts I might make. That's been really important to me. I think it's part of the reason why we want to offer this her enterprise for other women, because if you are going to do any pivot, you want that sort of community to give you ideas to bounce off of. And, or if you're just feeling down and you need that pick me up, like, my client canceled and this was a big project. This was my month's salary or whatever, all those things can happen. And go ahead, Melissa.
With the mastermind or just a group of friends who are who have similar values or goals or are trying to head in the same direction, the nice thing is that they help bring a different perspective during those conversations. Is if you're unsure about something or you're just not sure what the next step is, maybe having that group with all their experiences helps, I think, with maintaining agility, because they're bringing in like, oh, well, have you thought of this? Or maybe this is a different opportunity. Yeah, so
No, I agree. It sounds like Kelly's mindset. I mean, it is. It's a mindset game. So if you're getting new frameworks or new ideas and perspectives from other people, you're upping your mindset game because you're looking at it a new way.
I know I've noticed like how much creativity can be a solution in crisis. And so sometimes when something happens, like I've noticed if I have a week where suddenly I don't have clients and I'm like kind of in a panic, or I go down the what if cycle in the mind game, that I just kind of freeze and I'm not coming up with solutions to like propel me forward into a better space. So that then if I can like get out of fight or flight, or I'm aware and do the deep breathing and just not allow that thought pattern of what if and getting caught in that cycle, and then just staying present, that those are places that allow creativity and problem solving when I'm kind of forced to be in a situation that I didn't plan on being in. And yeah, I think you're right. Having those mastermind communities where other people are around you encouraging that creativity is a huge help. Yeah, I think that's huge. But also, like, for me, yeah, like recentering and just centering your mind and your body and just being present. And Michael Hyatt has that thing of like, what possibilities does this problem bring? And so,
Right.
um, yeah, and if yeah, and again, pivoting is solving a problem, whether it's a problem that was forced on you or that you recognize and have solutions for.
like especially now with COVID, something that, I mean, I'm still not sure exactly what's going to happen, but I can foresee the pivot in the future is, schooling with children. It wasn't planned for me to be a homeschooler this year. That wasn't part of my plan. And I'm just of the thought process that I really want to keep that distance, even if schools are starting in fall or whenever this is released. Um, I still want the space. And so I really need to consider homeschooling. I really need to take that as a big possibility. And like you were saying, to maintain agility, one of my things is like looking for the information, doing the research. And so this week, right now, as we record this, I am participating in an online conference that's free, that is all about childhood education. And so, because I foresee that in my future, the way that I prepare for this pivot is like, I'm going to look for the information. I need to find, where can I find the information? And I'm going to the people that I trust. You know, uh, if I want to learn about money management, I'm going to go to people I trust in money management. The reason I'm doing this parenting conference is because one of the speakers is someone I've already been exposed to, and I already, jive with their ideas. And so finding the information, but from resources you trust, are a big way to kind of maintain that agility in a pivot.
I so agree. And I also agree that education is going to totally shift. That from my education background, yeah, I think it's definitely shifting a lot. And I'm completely homeschooling this year after only doing it partially with my son 2 years ago, and now doing it for my kindergartner. All three of my children will be homeschooled this year, and I'm definitely prepping for the school year. So I'm right there with you. You have to start finding those those masters, like you said, that you trust. So you can feel secure that you're making the pivot that's going to be smoother if you feel like you have the knowledge to help you make the change.
It's fine. We did partial homeschool last year, so I think this year it'll be fine. But yes.
That's the other thing. Like we also do our meditation or whatever relaxing activities we can do for dysregulation if we're making a pivot that we didn't choose. Like me, I was supposed to be building my business this year, and we ended up buying a house, which took up a couple months. And then we finally got settled, and I could really get to work on my mini retirement year. The kids came home. So, it's like you have to also figure out how to find your Zen when you didn't choose a pivot and you've got to keep moving forward. Whatever tools for dysregulation you use to find that peace.
What are some tools that we feel like are essential or really helpful for us
To pivot.
for pivoting? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Okay, yeah,
So
I had that. Yeah. Good.
Yeah. So for me, tools that were really helpful for pivoting and that I would recommend everybody do is that mindfulness and keeping your head in the game so that you can be agile and creative. And so I think keeping that in mind and noticing when you're like pausing or freaking out, that there's a way to kind of move out of that space.
I know for me, I like to journal my quarters, kind of like what I want to get done for the business, whatever I'm working on. And just going back and reviewing my quarters can give me an idea if I need to make a pivot, like a small change, if it's a small change in business. That's always been helpful for me to just go back and look at what I wrote, what my goals were, and do I want to adjust them. I completely adjusted my business based on my feelings between quarter one of this year and quarter three. I totally switched because I didn't feel satisfied with what I was working on. If I didn't have those goals written out and the journaling time I spent writing out my thoughts and feelings about what I wanted to get done, I wouldn't have realized I should have pivoted. I might still be working on something that I didn't have the passion for anymore.
And mine actually like piggybacks off that goal setting. I think a super useful tool, and if you can take a couple minutes to just start a list of 100 things. What are 100 things that you kind of want to get done? I don't like calling it a bucket list because it's not dependent on when the last day is, but having that list of 100 things meant that when you're forced into a pivot, you can kind of have somewhere to go, and maybe they weren't your goals for this particular season, but you can go back and be like, oh, you know what, now I have time where I can maybe focus on learning that Spanish, or going, like I always wanted to do a mud run. Like, let's do something fun for a little bit when we're forced into a pivot. Let's find some joy to recenter ourselves. But I did exactly what you said, Nicole, which is I went back, I make year goals, and I went back to those goals, and I'm like, what of this during this forced pivot of quarantine? What of this is still applicable? What of it do I need to let go of? And then what can I bring in from my list of 100?
Oh, I love that. The list of 100.
That's awesome. And then I have a list of questions that maybe I'll be able to include as a download, but it's how to maintain creativity in crisis and kind of getting your head back in the game and bringing your body back into that space where you can move and not feel like you're freezing. So, so I'm glad we were able to have this discussion today, and I'm super excited for all of your pivots and the the babies that come out of your transition. That's like, but how this transition plays out for all of us. So, all right, best to you guys.
Great talking.
Thank you guys so much. This is great.
Thank you, change makers, for tuning in to the Her Enterprise podcast, episode 005. where we talk about pivoting, whether it's a planned pivot because you want to change directions or it's a sudden surprise. Pivoting is an opportunity to find a solution for problems, and today we discussed a few of the tools that we find useful for helping us in those moments of change. For example, find a mastermind group, find a mentor, do some of that deep breathing. Whatever you do, just remember, like Kelly said, life is a mind game, and we've got to keep pushing forward. We've got to keep moving. Next week, we will be interviewing Nicole, one of Her Enterprise members, and I am so excited for you to listen into that interview. The ladies from Her Enterprise are a women's collective of knowledge, inspiration, and connection. We are change makers. This is a podcast for the whole person. It is for you and your business. Let's grow, let's flourish, let's rise with Her Enterprise. Are you ready to be a change maker? Hit subscribe.